So if you live in Central Ward in Weston Town Centre, there's a 50% chance you'll live in a private rented property. And if you live in one of those private rented properties, there's a 30% chance that property has been classed as non-decent. For what must be about 5 years now, I have sought to assist those in private renting issues with their landlords on both improving the condition of their property and advising when they are threatened with eviction. It's iniquitous that no fault eviction is still legal in England, whereas it is not in Scotland. And this is despite the fact the Conservative government promised 2 years ago to bring in legislation to abolish it.
Full of shit.
Currently, if a tenant receives a Section 21 eviction notice, they are given 56 days to leave, and the landlord does not have to give any reason whatsoever. I live in Central Ward. It is one of the most deprived in England, where the life expectancy is 14 years shorter than the most affluent parts of North Somerset. The statistics of private rent and health that I've quoted are from a health needs assessment for the ward, which was published in May 2016. At the time, I picked up from that report, the inference was poor health and poor housing conditions were inextricably linked. The previous year, shortly after I moved to Weston, I attended Banksy's exhibition. And at that exhibition was a stall run by the newly formed community union, ACORN, which was campaigning against poor private rent housing conditions in Bristol. ACORN has gone on to grow to a national organisation with around 20,000 supporters. One of ACORN's first successes was convincing Bristol City Council, 2016, to introduce selective licensing of landlords in the Stapleton Road area in Easton. You cannot operate as a landlord in the designated area unless you are granted a license. In August 2016, the Staple Road licensing scheme had successfully improved 700 private rented properties and resolved 199 serious hazards by cracking down on road landlords. In fact, most of the road landlords left. Carl Denyer, a name you may know, as councillor from Clifton Down, called for the mayor to extend the landlord licensing scheme. In fact, Marvin Rees told me that he was going to apply to the Secretary of State to extend the scheme, because as the scheme operates at the moment, it only can cover 20% of the private rented housing stock. Carla said, we want the council to extend landlord licensing to make sure landlords provide minimum standards in other problem areas of the city. People may think of Clifton Down as a privileged area, but behind the grand front doors, there are many untold stories of damp, mould, and dangerous living conditions. I've met people who pay extortionate rent, yet have daily battles to get their landlord to fix a broken toilet or mend a leaking roof. About the same time, I received an invitation from Nick Ballard, who was one of the 3 founders of ACORN UK, to come for a chat. And I floated the idea of a similar licensing scheme for Central Weston. Nick informed me it's happening. In fact, it's just been announced today. North Somerset Council, Conservative Executive Member, has signed signing the go-ahead for its introduction in November 2016. Then the wheels came off. One particular landlord, whose name is Paul Routledge, who owned, and maybe still owns, around 100 rental properties in Weston, and a few of his landlord friends raised £12,000 and threatened North Somerset Council with a judicial review, claiming they lacked evidence for bringing in licensing. The Conservative administration, on advice from their legal department, took fright. North Somerset Council had not had a good record on judicial reviews, so they put the scheme on hold and began to consider other options. The councillors who wrote the report originally to say what a good idea licensing would be for Central Weston, in 2017, wrote a new report heavily biased against licensing, recommending an area action approach. By an area action approach, they mean that they will pick out a street or an area from time to time and go and check how the property is there. At the same time, the landlords who had threatened a judicial review formed a self-accreditation scheme in which they would police themselves under the banner National Landlords Code of Excellence Limited, or NLCE. The council recognised the self-accreditation scheme and then worked closely with the landlords. Tenants' views were forgotten. When the manifestos were drawn up for the May 2019 North Somerset Council elections, I lobbied both the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party about bringing in licensing. The Liberal Democrat manifesto stated, under our priorities in the next 4 years, will be deliver a fair deal for private renters by introducing a compulsory licensing scheme for landlords to improve standards and drive out rogue landlords. The Labour Party manifesto said Labour locally would tackle the broken housing market by cracking down on rogue landlords and introducing landlord licensing to ensure the quality of privately rented homes. So I thought I'd be pushing at an open door when the new Rainbow Coalition took over the administration, especially as the new leader, Don Davis, said he'd mailed me in January 2019, I heartily endorse your comments. In my own ward, the poorest housing conditions are in privately rented properties. We should have area-wide licensing. But now we're in the 3rd year of the administration and licensing has not come to pass. North Somerset Council is currently running a consultation on the draft strategy for housing for the next 3 years. It mentions, again, working closely with landlords, but there's not a single mention in the consultation of licensing of landlords. Again, the tenants have been forgotten. I left ACORN about a year ago and now operate under the banner of Western Housing Action. I've gathered together about 40 supporters who discuss these views, and we are going to go out and campaign heavily again to bring in licensing. And as Western Housing Action, I'm doing the rounds again, drumming up support for licensing. Tom Leimdorfer was very supportive. Carl Denyer has spoken out in favour, Carla Denyer has spoken out in favour. What I'm really asking tonight is, can I count on the support of the Green Party locally in North Somerset? What I'd like from you is help in getting our views across in that consultation. Also reminding the other parties that they did promise something which they haven't delivered. There recently was a local landlord who definitely is a rogue. He isn't part of the self-accreditation scheme. I've been dealing with him for about three years. One of his poor properties of one of the tenants I was helping appeared in the Observer on a property page about Weston in particular. He was recently fined by the council by £15,000. It was put in the Western Mercury, but they didn't even mention his name. I've asked whether he's been put on the National Register of Rogue Landlords. I haven't got a response. I expect the answer is no, because as far as I know, no rogue landlord from North Somerset has ever been put on that register. We still have rogue landlords here. If we'd had licensing, he wouldn't have been able to operate in the first place. I understand he has been trying to buy back the properties that he went into receivership, and he tried to buy back them, and he's still free to operate. And he looks like he's still going to be free to operate in this area. I just found it so frustrating after 5 years that I'm still banging on about the same things, that I was banging on about in 2016, and we seem to have got absolutely nowhere. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. As there aren't that many of us, we can just take questions verbally. If anyone wants to ask a question, come off mute and put your hand up. I've got one, Alan, but what is who pays the cost of licensing? Presumably the landlord, but they would pass it back one way or another to the tenant.
Yeah, in 2016, the cost to the landlord here was £320 a property, and that was for 5 years. It worked out a minuscule amount on a sort of monthly basis.
£15.
Yeah, the cost in Bristol is nearer £1,000 for a property, and I know landlords here who own properties in Bristol and are quite happy about it. The argument's always been that, oh, it will just be passed on to the tenants. Yes, maybe, but my experience of landlords is that they charge as much as they can get away with anyway.
Yeah,
it's what's called the market value.
What additional penalty or enforcement is there then? Again, how does licensing make it more difficult for a rogue landlord?
If they fail to get a license and operate as a landlord, they get fined, and it's quite a heavy fine. There's also enforcement fines if they fail to upkeep their properties. Off the top of my head, I believe there's been a fine in Bristol of the order of £20,000. Bristol tell me that they're not losing money over it. For some reason, North Somerset believed they would lose money over it. They quoted a government report saying that it hadn't paid its way in lots of areas, but when you looked at the report then summarised it and said just because they weren't charging enough for a licence. Basically that's
So is the fee to the landlord is basically pays for the cost for the council to enforce it, is the theory.
And at the moment, they have an action area scheme, and they're paying for staff to run that. So I can't quite see the difference why with licensing, it's costing them money at the moment, and they're getting no comeback.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else got any questions? Oh, Bridget.
Bridget, you're
Johnny
muted.
can go first. Johnny can go first because I'm eating and Johnny's got his hand up. And
Go on, Johnny.
Yeah, bon appetit, Bridget. Okay, I think everybody here knows that I am fully supportive, if I can say the word, of licensing. There is a however, a caveat type thing. So I know some landlords that won't fit in with the criteria, yet what they provide is still reasonable. I must say reasonable quality accommodation that suits their tenants. And I can't help but feel for those landlords that are in a catch-22. They generally only own one property. For those landlords that I own, in fact, the landlords that I know, in fact, they all own one property with a few flats in it. And their fear is they're not up to standard. They don't have fire alarms and don't have the rest of the things that they should have according to criteria. But what they do provide is a safer and longer term residents for their residents. And I wonder how that fits into it, Alan. And there's no criticism intended in this, but there is a worry that some of the good landlords that don't fit the criteria are going to fall through a net, and that's going to make the situation worse.
It's a fair comment, but if for say their fire alarms aren't working, they're already in trouble, or they certainly could be.
That's exactly the problem I'm saying. I mean,
Yeah.
I live in a property where I know my fire alarms are they're not connected, but you know what? I'll deal with it, type stuff. I'd rather be here than be somewhere else, because many of the somewhere else's aren't as good.
I think so my take on that, Johnny, is that your landlord or similar need assistance to get to. There's a reason. There's like red tape that we hate, but then there's a reason why things like a gas boiler should be checked and things like a fire alarm should be in place. So I can sympathize with what you're proposing, but I think that those landlords may need assistance to get their properties to a place that is safe for everybody, because that's what we need. But so I think that's a bit of a side, like my take would be those landlords need to be worked with, not made into an enemy of, because they bring strong value to the rental community, but they need to be part of, they also need to take seriously the role that they play in the picture and in the system.
Yeah,
is my take on
and
that.
I 100% agree with what you said, Bridget. And sorry to drag this on, but I think it's really an important point, because landlords are portrayed often as this mass capitalists, and they're often not. From the landlords I know, they're not. They bought a building as an investment when that was a good idea, and now they're drowning in it, so to speak, because they can't afford to upkeep it. And I know that's potentially their problem, but it's potentially everybody's problem. And if we're looking at social housing, we need to support the landlords that are trying to support the residents within their buildings.
Yeah. Richard?
Okay, Alan, thank you. This is very, very serious and important issue. I'm glad you've raised it. And I think we all instinctively want to support it and get it through. My question is, how are we going to avoid the problem they got in 2016 with the judicial review? How are we going to sidestep that?
Well, the strange thing is the council backed down. Since then, I've met with one of the ministers of housing at the time, and he advised me that if it had gone to a judicial review, in his humble opinion, the landlords would definitely have lost.
Good. All right.
It was just the threat of a judicial review that stopped North Somerset Council going ahead.
I think an interesting part of the dynamic is I think that a number of councillors based in Weston are landlords, and I'm talking of Lib Dems. I think that obviously I think some Conservatives, but I also think Lib Dems, and I think for that reason they it's an interesting question around. So you use the word rogue, and I almost don't know what the definite, like where, that's quite a thrown around. And I'm not, so with my councillor hat on, there was a resident virtually across the road from me, and she actually contacted Liam Fox, whose assistant then contacted me, and they never get running hot water. And maybe the management, estate agent, letting agent would send somebody else to fix it. But for some reason, like the guy would come and fix it, but within a day, it's like there was definitely a fault in the boiler or something. It would stop working again. And they had two children. One was a disabled child, and for 2 years they have been boiling a kettle to run a bath for their children. That's ridiculous. And they didn't have a secure tenancy, and they felt like they were on a rent that was lower than the average in our area. So, but they needed to be in the area for the schools and for the ability to reach their families and their jobs. So they didn't feel like they had any choices or options, and they didn't feel like they could kick off back to their landlord because they didn't want to be homeless. And the only thing, and obviously I'm Backwell, and the only thing they would get offered was Weston, and that was miles from their community. So really amazingly, we have managed to, they last week moved to an affordable, to a social housing, a new build in Backwell. So I'm super delighted that they now have a home there. But, you know, we know of these situations and stories where landlords are not doing their responsibility, and people pay their rent and they struggle to find their rent every month. And then, you know, the landlords still kind of hold them hostage. But I was thinking about sorry, that was a bit of a kind of, you know, random story, but rogue, not rogue, you know, rogue and layers of rogue, I guess. And kind of the people taking it personally. So thinking of a councillor who might own 2 properties, who might be a landlord, who might not think they are the best, but don't want to be bunched with the worst, and kind of them feeling themselves to be hypocritical, and so not going too far into this issue. Do we think that's in play in Weston?
I certainly know one of the Liberal Democrat landlords, and I've had that discussion with him. Admittedly, he was reluctant at first to support it, but recently, I would say he would support licensing after that discussion. I can think of only one off the top of my head, but there certainly are conservative ones who definitely will not support it.
Yeah, but they don't win the votes right now, so that's good. When I feel like in the past couple of years we've tried to introduce things, is the only things that this administration has done is action zones rather than license.
Yeah, and I don't really know how it's going. There doesn't seem
Right.
any figures that I can get hold of without a freedom of information, which I will try.
Yeah, which you can do that and do that. I don't, you know, other people are doing it on different issues, so why don't, you know, do go for that?
I can talk freely to Bristol City Council Housing Department, and they give me all the figures without a freedom of information.
And have you been discouraged to speak to, or have you been told you can't speak to specific officers, or do you not know the names?
But what the officers at Bristol, they just say, "We wish you luck. You'll never convince North Somerset," and it's because their own conversations with the housing officers here.
Okay.
Okay.
So in a way, we want to hold the others to account in what they've been pledging to do. So it's Mike Bell's portfolio. We may as well say that, you know, it's, you know, we each have different responsibilities to drive, and I can't, you know, the Greens can drive what the Greens have been allotted to do, and then we need to nudge and influence others and hold others to account, which I think we can do and should do. So I guess then the next question. Oh, and you said the most recent consultation is out. Are there specific changes in the language that you think, I completely hear what you're saying, that the tenant isn't in there enough. Are there specific asks that we should all be writing that needs to go in now?
Well, I think basically, I went to one of their stakeholding meetings yesterday, but it was sort of afterthought that they asked me. I wasn't in the initial list. It was just that one of the participants realised I wasn't there, and said, "I think you should invite Alan." And it's this general lack, I think, of actually consulting with the people that are affected, whereas there seems to be a continual consultation with the landlords themselves, which I can understand it, because landlords, especially some of the worst ones, are providing properties with no deposit, they're accepting housing benefit where other landlords won't. In some ways, the council needs those properties, but it isn't right that they're not fit to live in.
Okay. I think, as Richard said, I mean, I think we're all personally supportive, and we'll need to, with Bridget, talk to the other councillors and, as the Green Party, and see what we can do on that. But yeah, it's, certainly wrong in this day and age that people are living in those conditions.
Yeah, it is. Well, one of the good things that came out of North Somerset is, I think it was Robert Payne put forward a motion calling on the government to end Section 21s, which is a situation I come across people all the time. It's Section 21s are just ruining their mental health.
It's just that your tenancy is ending because we want it to end because we've decided to do something different with this property, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. And yeah. I'm coming across more and more now, especially with the uplift in universal credit being removed. There are more and more people falling behind with rent. There are people who've gone on to universal credit during COVID, so they didn't have, so to them it's just a cut. You can uplift because they never had the original one. And so many of them are suddenly faced with the fact they can't pay their rent. Even with social housing, one of the things they ask you, are you in arrears with your rent? And it does inhibit you getting social housing. And I can see more and more people facing the fact that they may be on the streets. Well, if they have families, they're not going to be on the streets because the council has a duty.
But homeless in name or another, not their own address that they can afford to pay the rent for.
Yeah, and for instance, one couple I'm dealing with at the moment, they are facing eviction in January, and I said, well, you've got a long way to go, but they're very, very anxious already. They contact me every day. They say how worried they are, and they were initially worried because they own over £40,000 between them. If you earn over £40,000, you can't bid for a social housing, but they can't find a place either. And I think more and more of those.
Johnny?
There's so much, but I think what I'd like to ask of everybody for the consideration is that we live in a world, and I realize this is bigger, we live in a world where mortgages, if you can afford a mortgage, you have a lesser payment for your home than you do if you can't afford, and therefore you have to pay rent. That needs addressing.
Yeah. And the real solution, of course, is to build more houses.
Alan,
disagree.
Disagree,
mate. Sorry, massively. Yeah. Should we go into this one?
So, how would you deal with the people who?
This is affordability. This is affordability problems. This is how much rent somebody thinks they can charge for a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom home or a 3-bedroom home. Then mortgages, interest rates, and people who have always had money, having enough money to giving another family a deposit so that they can help them get on the ladder. That is not to do with how many homes there are built. That is just affordability. And then we have people who can afford to buy another property and another property. And at the same time, the rent keeps going up. We also have that local housing allowance is not what the rent is. So no. Local housing allowance is a stupid term. What I used to remember it as housing benefit. Housing benefit should pay so that you could rent to live the place you need to live, to do your job, to take your children to school. And right now, housing benefit has been lost and put into universal credit. That is bollocks. That doesn't work. Asking many people to work out how to pay their rent and their bills and buy food on universal credit. It's not enough and it's not working. And it's a really broken system. But building a load of houses for people who have enough money to buy a house is not going to make those rents go down. I honestly do not see that. And they have claimed that we should build more houses and build more houses. We should also help those who have larger properties, maybe split them into smaller properties, or be comfortable living in a way of the shared lives model, which I think is much more suitable for our society because it addresses more of the broken things. I had a conversation with the staff who are trying to help resettle the Afghan refugees, and apparently the government has said you can't live in a shared house. Everybody must have their own front door and their own locked thing. Well, what if you had 3 individual young ladies, young men who would like to live together so that they create their own family unit? No, not allowed. So that's just rubbish. We expect 75-year-olds to live independently alone in a big house, meeting all the bills, getting up and down the stairs. That doesn't work. That's not a healthy society. This is just people. So that is one of the, I don't know if I've been that eloquent, but I honestly have seen many governments saying, we'll build lots of houses. And then suddenly those people who struggle with rent will suddenly have a house they can afford. I don't see it happening. And it's a much bigger problem that needs addressing than just put up some bricks and build a house.
Maybe I should put it a different way. There's, at the moment, 3 developments that I know are going to happen in Central Western, or certainly have been planned in Central Western. There was one on the seafront, which was
Which one?
the old British Legion building.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I knew that's what you meant. Yeah.
I don't know all the details.
From memory, I can't remember how many apartments it was, but it
300-ish.
the developer put in a statement saying they didn't have to provide any affordable housing, although it was North Somerset policy that they had to provide, or sorry, the benchmark was they provided 30% affordable housing. They said they didn't have to provide it because they could claim vacant building credits, which was a scheme the Tory government brought in, which said that if a building didn't increase its floor size, then and it was vacant, it was brownfield, then the developer did to provide affordable housing. Most councils have used the definition of vacant, meaning it's been vacant for 3 years, and no point in that 3 years was it in 6 months continuous use. The building in British Legion, I was told by 2 councillors that was the case. So I found a member of the staff who used to work at British Legion, and in fact, they were still there in February 2019. So it has been in continuous use in the last 3 years. The reason they got away with it is that although North Somerset drafted the supplementary planning document for that in 2016, it hasn't been adopted yet. 5 years.
What's that document? So what's that document called? Empty homes or no?
Vacant building credits. So I can send you a copy of it.
Yeah, do that.
My moles in the council sent it to me, but yeah, it's available. I've been to the chief executive about it. She has confirmed that it will be considered for the new housing policy. But
that's the thing. They want to wrap everything into the local plan, which is another 2 years.
Yeah.
It'll be 2 years before it's adopted. So it's almost like you know that you're in the wrong place, but you know that they're kicking it down. What they're saying, we'll tie that into 2 years' time.
But what I was a bit bemused about is that the cabinet member who was responsible for affordable housing still believed that the case was that the British Legion had been empty for 3 years, and it wasn't.
Who is the cabinet member?
For affordable
John or Mike?
No, it's Mark Caniford. It comes under his part. Yeah.
Can I get Richard in? He's had his hand up for a while.
Oh, thanks. I just wanted to go quickly back to the section 21 issue that was, I just wondered whether it might help a tiny bit if this meeting wrote to Caroline Lucas and our members of the House of Lords, just to say that we all agreed that section 21 should be ended, and whether the opportunity comes up, they could push it forward. They would support the ending of section 21. Just a little letter. I mean, it's all, it's not going to bring a miracle, but it'll just push things forward in the direction we want, won't it?
If they can remind the Tory government they've promised it, that'd be great. Yeah.
I wonder, sorry, Alan, sorry, Richard. I wonder if someone would like to set up one of those, I don't know, 38 degrees or whatever it is, petitions, so we can actually get it pushed.
I suspect there already is one, but
Yeah, I think there will already be one, but it's worth finding.
yeah. The other two developments I mentioned, one is the rugby club. They're delivering, and from memory, that is 200 apartments. One of my colleagues spoke to the developers, and their intention is to provide no affordable housing, although they're in an area, again, 30% is supposed to be provided, so there should be 60 houses there. We also now have Weston Football Club, who are copying the rugby club and doing the same. In fact, I've counted on a sort of back of a fact packet that there are at least well over 100 affordable housing, which should be, according to the North Somerset policy, not going to happen.
There's something about Central Western being exempt. Is that right? Like, is that properly a policy or not? I mean, can we revoke it? Can we pull it back?
The regeneration planning document
zone
Western says 0 affordable housing, and the reason they said was because we will not attract developers. But again, I attended a Zoom meeting today with Alex Hearn, who is running the placemaking project. He talked about 1,000 houses in Central Western on the land currently owned by Homes England, and he said that some of those would be a portion of those would be affordable, which is actually against his own document. So I'm not quite sure what's happening there.
No, it's because, well, no, they would. I think isn't the document saying that it's not required to have any affordable, so that it would be encouraging private developers to just build out and improve the city centre. However, if North Somerset Council were the developers, which is the proposition, then there's no way we would want to be developing a site without. However, I like Alex, and I like what I believe he wants to try and make things better, but he constantly says the price. He's so stuck that he says that the land prices and the end value prices of properties in Weston-super-Mare make it unviable to deliver affordable housing there. What we could do with is a couple of other private developers saying that's not true, because until he starts changing on his tune on that, the advice he gives is it's like not viable for us to deliver affordable housing there. It's like, but our job is to deliver affordable housing. So stop finding reasons why. Well, for one thing, we're not a developer, so we shouldn't be looking for the kind of profits. The council shouldn't be looking for profits, but because they're so desperate for money, they're always trying to turn things into a best case. You know, what people will say, is your council delivering value for money? Are they being competitive, or are they some slush where money disappears? So one set of people are saying, how much can you make off this? Well, if a developer did it, they'd make that much money, and we might take 2 or 3%, 5%, 10% off that, but people still expect to make money off it. And do you know what I mean? Like, different people are trying to push different angles on that. Mm-hmm. It's quite challenging, I think, but if somebody can tell Alex that he's wrong.
I had a word with, I talked to Homes England, because I thought one of their original remits was to provide affordable housing.
Homes England are a pile of poo, I'm afraid, in Johnny's words. I've worked with them for the past 8 years, and they are so bad at what they do that they've been like pillared and pushed. Central government set it up to deliver affordable housing, and then the next year kind of went and make as much money and stimulate the market and don't give money to these people and make sure they have to jump through those hoops. And then it became so diluted, quangoed, or moved in different political punches that Homes England goes through so many iterations of restructure and it's a horrible space of, because I got grant from them for Bristol Community Land Trust, and the trying to meet their criteria for reporting was like, you know, we were a very small organization and they were making us respond like we were somebody like Taylor Wimpey. There was just no movement on, aren't you so organized and so professional that you have 15 lawyers behind every decision, you know? So, no.
Well, one of the other
Sorry, can I?
Yeah.
So we're getting off the subject a little bit here. I know it's all linked, but everything's linked. Are there any other points specifically around the licensing before we? Because we've got Richard to talk next on insulating homes and.
I think, Alan, I think my ask would be if there are like 2 or 3 specific things, either like how could the councillors, what specific text would you like to see changed in that housing document that's out to consultation? Right. How could we strengthen this licensing conversation, or where that you could write to me and Karen and Stuart, and apologies if you have done and we haven't previously responded to you, and maybe we need a separate, because I think Karen might like to push this further as well with her advice. So kind of, if you want to take this further with us, then I think we'd be happy and keen to do that. I certainly would. But helping us with what language you want it to say, or what you think could work, or what Bristol City Council have done, so that it's very much like, why aren't you doing this? So we have really specific questions to ask or push. Then us Green councillors, I think, would like to do that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.